I never thought warming up my truck on a cold February morning in Boise, Idaho would lead to a police visit, but that was before I met Barbara Henderson, the self-appointed guardian of our neighborhood's peace and quiet. The frost covered my windshield like a thick white blanket when I stepped outside at 6:30 that Tuesday morning. My breath formed clouds in the frigid air as I fumbled with my keys, the metal cold enough to burn against my fingertips. I had just started my new job at Morrison Construction downtown, and I needed to be there by 7:15 for the morning crew meeting. My diesel truck, a well-maintained 2019 Ford F-250, needed a good 10 minutes to warm up properly in this weather. The temperature had dropped to -8 degrees overnight, and I knew from experience that jumping straight into a cold diesel engine and driving off was asking for trouble. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life with that distinctive diesel growl. White exhaust poured from the tailpipe as the engine worked through the cold start. I locked the doors, left it running, and headed back toward my front door to grab my lunch from the kitchen. That was when I saw her. Barbara Henderson stood on her porch across the street, already dressed despite the early hour, her arms crossed over her chest. She was wearing what I had come to recognize as her signature look. A crisp blazer over a turtleneck, khaki pants pressed with sharp creases, and an expression that suggested she had just bitten into a lemon. Her blonde hair was cut in that severe bob that seemed to be standard issue for women who enjoyed telling others what to do. I had only lived in the Pleasant Valley Estates subdivision for 3 months, having bought my modest 3-bedroom ranch house in November. The neighborhood was nice enough, with well-maintained homes built in the early 2000s, mature trees lining the streets, and a small park at the end of the cul-de-sac. What the real estate agent had failed to mention was that the homeowners association was run by Barbara Henderson, who treated the HOA bylaws like they were the 10 Commandments carved in stone. I waved politely and went inside, hoping that would be the end of it. I grabbed my insulated lunch bag from the counter, double-checked that I had my work gloves, and pulled on my heavy Carhartt jacket. Through the front window, I could see my truck was still running, the exhaust gradually becoming less visible as the engine warmed. I had maybe 5 more minutes before it would be ready to drive comfortably. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from my coworker Marcus. "Roads are icy as hell. Give yourself extra time." I typed back a quick thanks and was about to pocket the phone when I heard the knock at my door. Actually, knock was too gentle a word. Barbara Henderson was pounding on my door like she was trying to break it down. I opened it to find her standing there, her face flushed red despite the cold. "Mr. Zimmerman, I need you to turn off that truck immediately." "Good morning, Barbara," I said, keeping my tone even. My name was Lucas Zimmerman, and I had learned early in life that staying calm usually diffused tense situations. "I am warming it up. I will be leaving in just a few minutes." "That is completely unacceptable," she snapped. "The noise ordinance in our HOA bylaws clearly states that no loud noises are permitted before 7 in the morning on weekdays. Your truck is disturbing the entire neighborhood." I glanced at my watch. 6:38. "I understand, but I need to get to work, and in this cold the truck needs time to warm up properly. I will be gone before 7. "That is irrelevant. The bylaws are clear. Turn it off now or I will be forced to take action." She stood there waiting as if I was going to immediately comply. "Barbara, I appreciate your concern about the neighborhood, but I am not breaking any laws. Warming up a vehicle is standard practice in cold weather. I will be leaving shortly." I started to close the door. She put her hand against it. "I am warning you, Mr. Zimmerman. I will call the authorities if you do not comply immediately." "That is your choice to make," I said. "Now, if you will excuse me, I need to get to work." I gently but firmly closed the door through the window. I watched her stomp back across the street to her house. I shook my head, grabbed my things, and headed out to my truck. The cab was finally starting to warm up, and the windshield was beginning to defrost. I climbed in, adjusted my mirrors, and was about to put the truck in reverse when I saw Barbara on her phone, gesturing animatedly toward my house. She was actually calling the police, over a truck warming up. I could not believe it. Part of me wanted to just leave, to drive off and let her explain to the authorities why she had wasted their time. But another part of me, the part that was tired of being pushed around by petty bureaucrats and neighborhood tyrants, decided to wait. I kept the truck running, turned on my heated seats, and pulled out my phone to let my supervisor know I might be a few minutes late. Within 15 minutes, a Boise Police Department cruiser pulled into the neighborhood. I watched in my rearview mirror as it slowed down, clearly looking for an address. Barbara rushed out of her house and flagged down the officer, pointing dramatically at my truck. The officer, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a tired expression that suggested he had seen everything in his years on the force, climbed out of his cruiser. He spoke with Barbara for a moment while I sat in my truck, the heater now blowing warm air, my windows completely clear. I rolled down my window as the officer approached. "Morning, sir. I am Officer Patterson. I got a call about a noise complaint. Is this your vehicle?" "Yes, sir. I am Lucas Zimmerman. I was warming up my truck before heading to work. It is -8 degrees out, and I need to let the diesel engine warm up properly before driving." Officer Patterson nodded slowly, glancing back at Barbara, who was hovering nearby, clearly trying to hear our conversation. "How long has the truck been running?" "About 20 minutes now. I started it at 6:30. I was planning to leave right about now, actually." I checked my watch. It was 6:55. "And you are not violating any noise ordinances. City ordinance allows vehicles to be warmed up on private property. There is no restriction on time of day for that." He looked over at Barbara, who had moved closer. "Officer, the HOA bylaws clearly state," she began. "Madam, HOA bylaws do not supersede city or state law. If there is no violation of actual noise ordinances, there is nothing I can do here." His tone was professional but firm. "But he was making excessive noise before 7 in the morning. The bylaws, madam. A truck warming up is not excessive noise. I can barely hear it from where I am standing, and diesel engines are naturally louder than gas engines, especially when cold. This gentleman has every right to warm up his vehicle on his own property." Officer Patterson turned back to me. "You are free to go, Mr. Zimmerman. Sorry for the delay." "No problem, officer, thank you." I put the truck in gear. Barbara was not done. "Officer, I demand that you cite him for violating our community standards. As the HOA president, I have the authority." Officer Patterson held up his hand. "Madam, let me be very clear. You do not have the authority to enforce city laws. What you have done this morning is waste police resources on a non-issue. I have real emergencies and real crimes to respond to. If you call again with frivolous complaints like this, you could be cited for misuse of emergency services. Do you understand?" Her face went from red to purple. "How dare you speak to me that way? I will be calling your supervisor." "You are welcome to do that, madam. His number is on the department website. Now, I suggest you go back inside where it is warm and let this gentleman get to work." Officer Patterson walked back to his cruiser, shaking his head. I backed out of my driveway, giving Barbara a small wave as I passed. The look on her face was priceless, a mixture of rage and humiliation. I felt a small surge of satisfaction, but I also knew this was not over. Barbara Henderson did not strike me as the type to let things go. I was right. That evening, when I got home from work around 6, I found a certified letter taped to my front door. It was from the Pleasant Valley Estates Homeowners Association, signed by Barbara Henderson in her capacity as president. The letter informed me that I was in violation of Section 7, Subsection C of the HOA bylaws regarding noise disturbances. I was being fined $250, and if I continued to warm up my vehicle before 7 in the morning, I would face additional fines of $500 per incident. I read the letter twice, my jaw clenching tighter with each word. This was insane. I had done nothing wrong. Officer Patterson himself had confirmed I was not violating any actual laws. But here was Barbara, wielding the HOA bylaws like a weapon because I had embarrassed her in front of the police officer. I went inside, threw my work bag on the couch, and immediately started searching for the HOA bylaws. When I had closed on the house, I had received a thick packet of documents including the bylaws, but I had only skimmed them at the time. Now I needed to read them carefully. After digging through a file cabinet in my small home office, I found the documents. The Pleasant Valley Estates HOA bylaws were 47 pages long, written in dense legal language that made my head hurt. I poured myself a glass of water and started reading. Section 7 was titled Noise and Disturbance Regulations. Subsection C stated, "No homeowner shall create excessive noise that disturbs the peace and quiet enjoyment of other residents between the hours of 10 o'clock p.m. and 7 o'clock a.m. on weekdays, or 10 o'clock p.m. and 9 o'clock a.m. on weekends." Excessive noise includes but is not limited to loud music, power tools, lawn equipment, and other disruptive sounds. I read it 3 times. The key words were excessive noise and disturbs the peace and quiet enjoyment. My truck warming up was neither excessive nor disturbing, as Officer Patterson had confirmed. The list of examples did not include vehicles, and even if it did, the bylaws were vague enough that excessive was subjective. I needed legal advice. I was not going to pay a $250 fine for doing something that was both legal and necessary. I spent the next hour researching HOA attorneys in Boise, finally settling on a firm called Davidson and Associates that specialized in HOA disputes. Their website showed several cases where they had successfully defended homeowners against overzealous HOA boards. The next morning, Wednesday, I made sure to start my truck at exactly 7:01. I did not want to give Barbara any ammunition, even if I believed I was in the right. It meant I had to rush a bit more, and my truck did not get as much warm-up time as I would have liked, but I made it work. I called Davidson and Associates from my lunch break and scheduled a consultation for Thursday afternoon. When I arrived home Wednesday evening, there was another note on my door. This one was handwritten on Pleasant Valley Estates HOA letterhead. "Mr. Zimmerman, your fine remains unpaid. Payment must be received within 30 days or additional penalties will apply. Furthermore, I observed your vehicle idling in your driveway this morning. While you were in compliance with the time restrictions, I remind you that excessive idling may constitute a violation of environmental regulations per Section 12 of our bylaws. Please be mindful of your neighbors. Barbara Henderson, HOA President." I crumpled the note in my hand. She was now making up violations. I had idled for maybe 2 minutes before driving away. This was harassment, plain and simple. Thursday afternoon, I left work early and drove to the offices of Davidson and Associates. The law firm was located in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel. I was greeted by a receptionist who directed me to a conference room where I met with Jennifer Davidson herself, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with dark hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Zimmerman, thank you for coming in. Tell me what is going on." She had a notepad ready and listened intently as I explained the entire situation, from warming up my truck to the police visit to the fine and the subsequent harassment note. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen against her notepad. "This is not unusual, unfortunately. Some HOA board members, particularly those with limited power in other areas of their lives, can become quite zealous about enforcing rules, even when those rules are not being violated. The good news is you have a strong case. The bad news is that fighting HOA disputes can be expensive and time-consuming. What are my options? First, we should send a formal response to the HOA contesting the fine. We will cite the actual bylaw language and argue that your actions do not constitute a violation. We will also reference the police officer's assessment. Second, we can request a hearing before the HOA board. Most bylaws require the board to grant homeowners a hearing before imposing fines. Did they offer you that? I shook my head. No, I just got the fine letter. That is a procedural violation on their part. We can use that. She made a note. Third, if this continues to escalate, we can file a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and improper enforcement of bylaws. However, I recommend we start with the less aggressive approaches first. How much will this cost me? My retainer is $2,000. That covers the initial response letter, the hearing preparation and attendance, and up to 10 hours of work. If we need to file suit, that will require an additional retainer. However, if we prevail, we can often recover attorney fees from the HOA. $2,000. That was a significant chunk of money, but I was not going to let Barbara Henderson bully me into paying a fine I did not deserve. Let's do it. Jennifer smiled. Good. I will draft the response letter today and send it certified mail. In the meantime, I recommend you document everything. Every interaction with Miss Henderson, every note she leaves, every fine notice. Take photos, save emails, record dates and times. If this goes to litigation, we will need that documentation. Over the next week, I followed Jennifer's advice meticulously. I started a folder on my computer where I scanned every document from the HOA. I wrote detailed notes about each interaction with Barbara. I made sure to start my truck at 7:01 every morning, and I timed exactly how long it ran before I drove away, usually about 5 minutes. Barbara did not make it easy. On Friday morning, I found her standing at the end of my driveway with her phone out, recording me as I walked to my truck. I ignored her, climbed in, and drove away. That afternoon, I received an email from the HOA email address with a video attachment. The email read, "Mr. Zimmerman, this video clearly shows you operating your vehicle at 7:02 a.m. with excessive exhaust emissions. This may constitute a violation of environmental standards. Please be aware that continued violations will result in escalating fines." I forwarded the email to Jennifer immediately. She called me within an hour. "This is perfect. Perfect. She is recording me now." "Yes, and she is building our harassment case for us. Keep all of this. I have sent the response letter to the HOA, contesting your fine and demanding a hearing. I expect we will hear back within the week." Jennifer was right. The following Tuesday, I received another certified letter from the HOA. This one was longer and more formal, written on official letterhead with multiple signatures, not just Barbara's. It acknowledged receipt of my attorney's letter and granted me a hearing before the HOA board, scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7 o'clock at the community clubhouse. The Pleasant Valley Estates Community Clubhouse was a small building near the neighborhood park, used for HOA meetings and occasional neighborhood events. I had never been inside. Jennifer agreed to attend the hearing with me, and we spent Wednesday evening preparing. She had compiled all my documentation into a neat folder, along with copies of the relevant bylaws, the police report from Officer Patterson's visit, and legal precedents from similar HOA disputes in Idaho. Thursday evening, I put on a button-down shirt and khakis, wanting to look presentable but not overly formal. Jennifer met me outside the clubhouse at 6:45. "Remember, stay calm and let me do most of the talking. If they ask you direct questions, answer honestly and briefly. Do not let them provoke you." "Got it." We walked inside. The clubhouse had a small meeting room with a long table at the front where 5 people sat, Barbara Henderson in the center. I recognized one of the other board members as Donald Fletcher, an older man who lived 2 streets over. The other 3 were unfamiliar. A younger woman with glasses, an older woman with gray hair, and a middle-aged man in a suit. There were about a dozen other residents in the room, sitting in folding chairs, apparently there to watch the proceedings. I wondered how many of them had been harassed by Barbara over minor HOA infractions. Barbara called the meeting to order with a sharp tap of a gavel. "This hearing is called to address the violations committed by Mr. Lucas Zimmerman of 847 Maple Drive. Mr. Zimmerman, you have been accused of violating Section 7, subsection C of our bylaws regarding noise disturbances. You have also been observed operating your vehicle in a manner that may violate environmental regulations per Section 12. Before we proceed with additional fines, you have requested this hearing. You may present your case." Jennifer stood. "Thank you, Madam President. I am Jennifer Davidson, representing Mr. Zimmerman. Before we address the substance of these accusations, I would like to note that Mr. Zimmerman was never offered a hearing before the initial fine was imposed. Your own bylaws, Section 15, subsection A, require that homeowners be given notice and an opportunity to be heard before fines are assessed. The fine notice sent to Mr. Zimmerman violated this procedural requirement, and therefore the fine should be voided." Barbara's face tightened. "That is a minor administrative oversight. It is a violation of your own bylaws, which you claim to be so concerned about enforcing. But let's move past that. The substance of your accusation is that Mr. Zimmerman violated noise ordinances by warming up his vehicle before 7 a.m. However, the evidence clearly shows otherwise." Jennifer pulled out a copy of the police report. "On the morning in question, a Boise police officer responded to your complaint and determined that no noise violation was occurring. Officer Patterson's report, which I have here, specifically states that the vehicle was not producing excessive noise and that warming up a vehicle is permitted under city ordinances." The younger woman with glasses, who I later learned was named Rachel Thompson, spoke up. "But our bylaws specifically prohibit excessive noise before 7 a.m. "They do," Jennifer agreed, "but the key word is excessive. Mr. Zimmerman's truck warming up in his own driveway does not meet any reasonable definition of excessive noise." The police officer confirmed this. "There is no evidence that any other residents were actually disturbed by the sound. In fact, the only complaint came from Miss Henderson, who lives across the street and appears to have a pattern of targeting Mr. Zimmerman." "That is completely false." Barbara slammed her hand on the table. "I am simply enforcing our community standards." "Are you?" Jennifer pulled out another document. "I have here copies of the HOA meeting minutes for the past 2 years. In that time, you have issued 17 fines to various residents." 11 of those fines were later rescinded or reduced after homeowners challenged them. That is a 65% error rate, Ms. Henderson. It suggests a pattern of overzealous and improper enforcement. The room fell silent. Several of the residents in the audience started whispering to each other. I saw a few nods of agreement. Donald Fletcher cleared his throat. Jennifer, those statistics are concerning, but we are here to discuss Mr. Zimmerman's specific situation. What about the environmental concerns? The excessive idling, Jennifer smiled. Mr. Fletcher, I am glad you asked. Section 12 of the bylaws references environmental regulations, specifically excessive idling that contributes to air pollution. However, the section does not define what constitutes excessive idling. Under Idaho state law, excessive idling for commercial vehicles is defined as more than 15 consecutive minutes. Mr. Zimmerman's vehicle is a personal vehicle, not commercial, and he has documented that his warm-up periods are typically 5 to 10 minutes. This is well within reasonable standards for cold-weather vehicle operation and does not violate any environmental regulations. The middle-aged man in the suit leaned forward. I am Robert Chen, Vice President of the Board. It seems to me that Mr. Zimmerman has been compliant with all actual regulations. Ms. Henderson, did you personally observe any disturbance to other residents? Did anyone else complain? Barbara hesitated. No, but that does not mean there was no disturbance. I am acting on behalf of the community. Without any evidence of actual harm or disturbance, Jennifer interjected. Which brings me to my next point. Ms. Henderson has engaged in a pattern of harassment toward Mr. Zimmerman. She has left multiple notes on his door, sent threatening emails, and even recorded him on video while he was simply going to work. This behavior goes beyond reasonable enforcement of HOA rules. It is targeted harassment, and if it continues, we will have no choice but to pursue legal action against both Ms. Henderson personally and the HOA as an entity. Barbara stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. How dare you accuse me of harassment? I have dedicated countless hours to this community, ensuring that property values remain high and that our neighborhood remains a desirable place to live. Mr. Zimmerman is new here and clearly does not understand or respect our standards. I respect reasonable standards, I said, speaking for the first time. What I do not respect is being fined and harassed for doing something that is both legal and necessary. I work construction. I need to be at my job site by 7:15 every morning. When it is -8 degrees outside, I need to warm up my diesel truck. That is not a violation of anything except apparently your personal preferences, Miss Henderson. Rachel Thompson spoke again. I think we need to take a vote. I move that we rescind the fine against Mr. Zimmerman and issue a formal apology for the procedural violation of not offering a hearing before assessing the fine. I second that motion, said the older woman with gray hair, whose name was Margaret Sullivan. Barbara looked furious. This is absurd. We cannot simply let residents do whatever they want. We are not, Robert Chen said calmly. We are acknowledging that Mr. Zimmerman did not actually violate our bylaws, all in favor of rescinding the fine. 4 hands went up: Rachel, Margaret, Robert, and Donald. Only Barbara voted against. The motion passes, Robert said. Mr. Zimmerman, your fine is rescinded and we apologize for any inconvenience. You are free to continue warming up your vehicle as needed, provided you remain in compliance with city noise ordinances. Thank you, I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. But Barbara was not done. This is not over. I will be calling a special election to review the composition of this board. Clearly, some members have forgotten their duty to maintain our community standards. Jennifer gathered her papers. Miss Henderson, I strongly advise you to be very careful about any further actions you take regarding Mr. Zimmerman. We have documented everything, and any additional harassment will result in immediate legal action. Are we clear?" Barbara did not answer, just grabbed her belongings and stormed out of the clubhouse. The hearing ended, and several residents came up to thank me and Jennifer. Apparently, Barbara had been a problem for years, but most people were afraid to challenge her because of the time and expense involved. One man, an older gentleman named Richard Kowalski, told me he had been fined $500 for putting up Christmas lights 2 days before the approved date according to the bylaws. He had paid the fine rather than fight it, which he now regretted. Over the next few weeks, life seemed to return to normal. I continued warming up my truck every morning, now without anxiety about being harassed. Barbara was noticeably absent from her usual perch on her porch, and I wondered if she was avoiding me or simply planning her next move. The answer came in mid-March. I received a notice in the mail that the HOA was raising annual dues from $300 to $800, with a note that the increase was necessary to cover increased legal expenses and administrative costs. The notice was signed by Barbara Henderson. I immediately forwarded it to Jennifer, who called me that evening. "She is retaliating. This is incredibly transparent and likely violates your bylaws. Most HOAs require a vote of the membership before raising dues significantly. Let me review your governing documents." 2 days later, Jennifer confirmed that any increase in annual dues of more than 10% required a vote of the full HOA membership, not just the board. Barbara had attempted to impose this increase unilaterally, which was a clear violation. Jennifer sent another letter to the board, this time copying all 5 members, pointing out the violation and demanding that the dues increase be rescinded and put to a proper vote. She also noted that if Barbara continued to use her position to retaliate against me, we would pursue a lawsuit for abuse of authority and harassment. This time, the response came quickly. Robert Chen called me personally. "Mr. Zimmerman, please accept my apologies." The board was not consulted about the dues increase. Barbara sent that notice on her own authority, which she does not have. We are rescinding the increase and will be holding a special board meeting to address her actions. Several board members, myself included, are concerned about her behavior. "I appreciate that, Mr. Chen. I do not want to cause problems, but I also will not be pushed around." "Understood. I want you to know that not everyone on this board agrees with how Barbara has been handling things. There are going to be some changes." True to his word, Robert Chen called for a special meeting of the HOA board the following week. I received a notice that the meeting was open to all residents, and that the agenda included discussion of board leadership and potential restructuring. I attended, along with Jennifer, who advised that showing up would demonstrate I was engaged and willing to work with reasonable board members. The clubhouse was packed, with at least 30 residents in attendance. Apparently, word had spread that this was going to be an important meeting. Barbara called the meeting to order, but her usual confidence seemed shaken. Robert Chen immediately asked to be recognized and proposed a motion. "I move that we hold a vote of no confidence in Barbara Henderson as HOA president, effective immediately, due to multiple violations of our governing documents, improper unilateral decisions, and behavior that has exposed the HOA to legal liability." The room erupted in murmured conversations. Barbara's face went pale. "You cannot do this. I have served this community for 8 years. "And we appreciate that service," Margaret Sullivan said, "but Robert is right. Your recent actions have been problematic. The unauthorized dues increase, the improper fine against Mr. Zimmerman, the failure to consult with the board on major decisions. We need new leadership. Donald Fletcher, who had been Barbara's ally in the past, spoke up. I have to agree. Barbara, I have tried to support you, but you have gone too far. This vendetta against Mr. Zimmerman has been embarrassing for all of us. The vote was 4-1, with only Barbara voting against. She was removed as president, and Robert Chen was elected as the new president by unanimous vote of the remaining 4 board members. Barbara stood, her face red, her hands shaking. You will all regret this. This community will fall apart without my leadership. Mark my words. She grabbed her purse and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The room was silent for a moment before Robert spoke. I know that was difficult, but it was necessary. Moving forward, this board will operate with transparency and fairness. We are here to serve the community, not to impose our personal preferences on our neighbors. Our first order of business is to review all outstanding fines and violations to ensure they are legitimate and properly documented. Over the next month, the new board under Robert's leadership conducted a comprehensive review. They rescinded 6 fines that had been improperly assessed, updated the bylaws to include clearer definitions and procedures, and established a formal appeals process for homeowners who disagreed with board decisions. It was like a breath of fresh air had swept through Pleasant Valley Estates. I thought that was the end of the story. Barbara had been removed from power, the HOA was functioning properly, and I could warm up my truck in peace. But I underestimated just how vindictive Barbara Henderson could be. In early April, on a mild Saturday morning, I was working in my garage, organizing some tools and enjoying the warmer weather. I heard shouting and looked out to see Barbara standing in the middle of the street, holding what appeared to be a thick stack of papers. She was yelling at Robert Chen, who had just pulled up in his car. I walked down my driveway to see what was happening. Several other neighbors had also emerged, drawn by the commotion. You had no right, Barbara was screaming. I built this community, I made it what it is. And you all conspired against me. Barbara, please calm down, Robert said, stepping out of his car. No one conspired against you. The board made a decision based on your actions. My actions? I was protecting property values. I was maintaining standards. She waved the papers in the air. Do you know what this is? This is a lawsuit. I am suing the HOA. I am suing you personally, Robert, and I am suing that man. She pointed at me. Lucas Zimmerman destroyed this community and you all let him. Jennifer had warned me this might happen. Disgruntled former board members sometimes filed lawsuits, though they rarely succeeded. I kept my voice calm. Barbara, I did not destroy anything. I just wanted to warm up my truck. You turned everyone against me. You brought in your fancy lawyer and made me look like a fool. You did that yourself, Margaret Sullivan said, walking over from her house. Barbara, we tried to work with you, but you would not listen. You became obsessed with control. It was unhealthy. Barbara turned on Margaret. You are all against me. Fine. We will see what a judge has to say about this. I am going to take everything from this HOA. I gave 8 years of my life, and this is how you repay me. Barbara, you are making a scene, Donald Fletcher said, joining the growing group. Maybe you should go home and calm down. Do not tell me to calm down. I know my rights. I know the law. She shuffled through her papers and pulled out what looked like a restraining order. I have already filed this. Robert Chen, you are not allowed to come within 100 feet of me. This is a temporary restraining order. Robert looked stunned. Barbara, what are you talking about? I have not done anything to you. You threatened me. At the board meeting, you threatened my position and my reputation. That is not how restraining orders work, Jennifer said, stepping forward. I had not even noticed her arrive, but apparently someone had called her. Barbara, filing a false restraining order is a serious matter. If you lied on that application, you could face criminal charges." I did not lie. He threatened me. But even as she said it, her confidence seemed to waver. A police car pulled up, lights flashing. Officer Patterson stepped out, and I almost laughed at the coincidence. He looked at the scene, at Barbara holding her papers, at the crowd of neighbors, and shook his head. "Let me guess. HOA dispute. Officer, arrest that man." Barbara pointed at Robert. "He violated my restraining order." Officer Patterson took the papers from Barbara and read through them quickly. "Madam, this is a temporary restraining order that you just filed. It has not been served yet, which means it is not in effect. Mr. Chen has not violated anything. But he is here harassing me." "Madam, you are standing in the middle of a public street yelling. He is standing in front of his own car. If anyone is causing a disturbance, it is you." Officer Patterson handed the papers back to her. "I am going to ask you to go home and calm down. If you continue to create a public disturbance, I will cite you for disorderly conduct." "He threatened me," Barbara insisted, but her voice had lost its edge. "Then you need to address that through proper legal channels, not by standing in the street screaming," Officer Patterson said firmly. "Go home, Miss Henderson." Barbara looked around at all of us, her face a mixture of anger and humiliation. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her house. Officer Patterson sighed. "I remember you, Mr. Zimmerman. The truck warming incident. Is she still causing problems?" "She was removed as HOA president," I explained. "And apparently she is not taking it well." "I see that. Look, I cannot tell you what to do, but I recommend everyone here document what just happened. If she continues this behavior, it could escalate, and you will want records." He looked at Robert. "Do you feel threatened by her, sir?" Robert shook his head. "No, just confused. I do not understand why she is doing this." "Some people do not handle loss of power well," Officer Patterson said. "If she does serve you with that restraining order, you will get a hearing. Be honest with the judge about what has happened. These things usually get dismissed when they are based on false claims." He got back in his car and drove away. The neighbors dispersed, everyone talking in low voices about what had just happened. Jennifer pulled Robert and me aside. "We need to be proactive here. If she has filed a lawsuit, the HOA will need to respond. Robert, you should consult with the HOA's legal counsel. Mr. Zimmerman, if she names you in the suit, I will defend you. This is clearly retaliatory and baseless." Over the next week, the situation somehow got worse. Barbara began sending mass emails to every resident in Pleasant Valley Estates, accusing the board of corruption, claiming they had violated election procedures, and insisting that I had bribed board members to turn against her. The emails were unhinged, full of typos and bizarre accusations. She claimed Robert was embezzling HOA funds, that Margaret was having an affair with Donald, and that I was part of some conspiracy to take over the neighborhood. None of it was true, of course, but the emails were disturbing in their intensity. Some residents forwarded them to Robert and Jennifer, concerned about Barbara's mental state. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late April, I woke up to find my truck had been vandalized. Someone had keyed deep scratches into the paint on both sides, slashed 2 tires, and poured what looked like bleach on the hood, which had damaged the clear coat. I immediately called the police. A different officer responded this time, a younger woman named Officer Martinez. She took photos, wrote up a report, and asked if I had any idea who might have done this. "I have a pretty good idea," I said, and explained the ongoing situation with Barbara Henderson. "You have any proof it was her? Security cameras?" I shook my head. "No cameras. But given everything that has happened, she is the obvious suspect. Unfortunately, without evidence, I cannot arrest her on suspicion alone. I will include your suspicions in the report, and I recommend you install security cameras immediately. If she does this again, we will catch her." I called my insurance company and filed a claim. The damage was going to cost about $3,000 to repair. I also went to Home Depot that afternoon and bought 2 high-quality security cameras with night vision, installing one facing my driveway and one covering my front yard. 2 nights later, at 2:30 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera app. I grabbed my phone and watched live as Barbara Henderson, dressed in dark clothing, crept across my front lawn carrying a can of spray paint. I immediately called 911 while simultaneously recording the camera footage. "This is Lucas Zimmerman at 847 Maple Drive in Pleasant Valley Estates. Someone is vandalizing my property right now. I have them on camera." The dispatcher kept me on the line while officers were dispatched. I watched on my phone as Barbara spray painted something on my garage door. The camera was clear enough that I could read it. "Liar" in bright red paint. She was just finishing when I heard sirens. Barbara looked up, panicked, and tried to run, but she was not fast enough. 2 patrol cars pulled up and officers jumped out. One of them was Officer Patterson. I went outside as they handcuffed Barbara, who was screaming about how I had ruined her life, how I deserved what I got, how the whole neighborhood was against her. Officer Patterson saw me and shook his head. "I had a feeling it might come to this. You have video?" "Yes, sir. Crystal clear." I showed him the footage on my phone. "We will need a copy of that. This is vandalism, criminal mischief, and with the prior incident, we will probably charge her with a pattern of harassment as well." He looked at Barbara, who was still yelling as officers put her in the back of a patrol car. "She is going to jail tonight. You will need to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement and provide the video evidence." I did exactly that. The next morning, I went to the Boise Police Department, gave my statement, and provided copies of the security footage. I also brought all the documentation Jennifer and I had compiled. The emails, the false restraining order, the timeline of harassment, everything. The detective handling the case, a serious man named Detective Harris, reviewed everything thoroughly. "Mr. Zimmerman, this is one of the clearest cases of harassment I have seen in a while. Combined with the vandalism charges and the evidence you have provided, the prosecutor will have no trouble getting a conviction. Miss Henderson is looking at criminal mischief in the 2nd degree, which is a misdemeanor, but with the pattern of behavior, she could face up to a year in jail and substantial fines." Barbara was arraigned 2 days later. She posted bail but was ordered to stay away from me and my property. The restraining order she had tried to file against Robert was denied by the judge, who noted that her claims were baseless and that she appeared to be misusing the court system. The criminal case moved forward over the next few months. Barbara hired a lawyer who tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested in going easy on her. The vandalism was bad enough, but the pattern of harassment and abuse of her former position made it worse. In June, the case went to trial. It was a short trial, only 2 days. The prosecution presented the security footage, my testimony, Officer Patterson's testimony about the original truck incident and Barbara's subsequent behavior, and testimony from other neighbors about the emails and the scene in the street. Barbara's lawyer tried to argue that she had been under extreme stress and that her actions were out of character, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. 2 counts of criminal mischief, 1 count of stalking, and 1 count of misuse of the 911 system stemming from her original call about my truck. The judge, A stern woman named Judge Patricia Reeves did not hold back during sentencing. "Miss Henderson, you held a position of responsibility in your community, and you abused that position to harass a neighbor over a trivial matter. When you lost that position, you escalated your behavior to criminal acts. This court takes harassment and stalking very seriously. You are sentenced to 9 months in jail, suspended to 18 months of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, and you are ordered to pay full restitution to Mr. Zimmerman for the damages to his vehicle, plus court costs. You are also prohibited from serving on any HOA board for a period of 5 years. If you violate the terms of your probation in any way, you will serve the full 9 months in custody. Do you understand?" Barbara, who had been stoic throughout the trial, broke down crying. "I understand, Your Honor." As part of the restitution order, Barbara had to pay me $3,200 to cover the damage to my truck and the cost of the security cameras. Her lawyer arranged a payment plan, and over the next several months, I received checks each month until the debt was paid in full. The HOA, under Robert's leadership, continued to improve. They revised the bylaws to include better protections for homeowners, established clear standards for what constituted violations, and implemented a transparent appeals process. Property values in Pleasant Valley estates actually increased, despite Barbara's predictions of doom. Barbara completed her probation without incident, though I heard from neighbors that she rarely left her house. She put it on the market about a year after her conviction and moved away. I never saw her again. As for me, I continued warming up my truck every winter morning without issue. The new HOA board even sent out a newsletter reminding residents that vehicle warm-up was permitted and encouraging people to be good neighbors by respecting both personal needs and community standards. On a cold January morning, almost exactly 2 years after the original incident with Barbara, I started my truck at 6:30. The temperature had dropped to -12 overnight, and I knew I would need a full 15 minutes of warm-up time. As the engine rumbled to life and exhaust poured into the frigid air, I looked across the street at the house where Barbara used to live. A young couple had moved in a few months earlier, and they waved friendly greetings whenever we passed each other. Robert Chen pulled up in front of my house, rolled down his window, and called out, "Cold enough for you, Lucas," I laughed. "Just about. You heading to work?" "Yeah, supposed to be at the office by 8. Hey, we are having an HOA meeting next week to discuss the spring landscaping budget. Hope you can make it." "I will be there," I said. He drove off, and I went back inside to grab my lunch and pour a thermos of coffee. When I came back out, my truck was warm, the windshield was clear, and I was ready to face another day at the construction site. As I backed out of my driveway, I thought about how such a small thing, warming up a truck on a cold morning, had spiraled into months of conflict and ultimately ended with someone going to jail. It was a reminder that power, even the small amount wielded by an HOA president, could corrupt when placed in the wrong hands. It was also a reminder that standing up for yourself, even when it was difficult and expensive, was sometimes necessary. The streets of Boise were quiet at that early hour, and I drove carefully on the icy roads toward downtown. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. My truck ran smoothly, the engine purring with the contentment of proper maintenance and adequate warm-up time. When I arrived at the construction site, Marcus was already there, standing by his own truck with a steaming cup of coffee. "Morning, Lucas. Heard from my wife that your old HOA president got sentenced. That whole thing was crazy." "Yeah, it was," I agreed, grabbing my hard hat from the back seat. But it worked out in the end. New board is much better. That is good. My neighborhood has an HOA too, but they are pretty reasonable. I think we got lucky. He took a sip of his coffee. You ready for today? We have got that foundation pour scheduled, and it is going to be tight with this cold weather. Ready as I will ever be. I pulled on my work gloves and followed him toward the site trailer for the morning meeting. Life moved on. The seasons changed. Spring brought warmer weather, and I no longer needed to warm up my truck. Summer was hot and busy with work. Fall painted the trees in brilliant colors. And when winter came around again, I started my truck without worry, knowing that my neighbors understood and my HOA board was fair. Pleasant Valley Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board organized neighborhood events. A summer barbecue, a Halloween party for the kids, a holiday lights contest in December. People actually looked forward to HOA meetings instead of dreading them. The sense of community that Barbara had claimed to be protecting with her rigid enforcement actually flourished once she was gone. I ran into Officer Patterson one afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. He was off duty, in civilian clothes, and almost did not recognize him until he called out my name. "Mr. Zimmerman, how have you been? No more HOA troubles, I hope." "None at all," I said, shaking his hand. "New board is great. Barbara Henderson moved away after her probation ended." "I heard about that. You know, in 20 years on the force, I have responded to hundreds of HOA disputes. Usually, they are minor things, neighbors arguing about fence heights or barking dogs. But every once in a while, you get someone like Miss Henderson who just cannot let things go. I'm glad you stood up to her. Too many people just pay the fines and suffer in silence." I had good legal help, I acknowledged, and it helped that she kept escalating. Eventually, she crossed the line from annoying to criminal. That she did. Officer Patterson ordered his coffee and then turned back to me. "You know what the ironic thing is? All of this over warming up a truck. Something completely normal and necessary. If she had just let it go that first morning, none of the rest would have happened." He was right, of course. That first confrontation, when Barbara had pounded on my door demanding I turn off my truck, had set everything in motion. If she had just waved and gone back inside, if she had not called the police, if she had not issued that first fine, everything would have been different. But people like Barbara Henderson did not think that way. They saw any challenge to their authority as a personal attack, any deviation from their rules as a threat to order. They could not distinguish between reasonable enforcement of community standards and petty tyranny. I thought about all the other residents who had been fined and harassed over the years. Richard Kowalski with his Christmas lights, the family who had been cited for having the wrong color mailbox, the couple who had been fined for planting flowers in their front yard without prior approval. All of them had either paid the fines or moved away rather than fight back. In some ways, I had been lucky. I had the resources to hire a good attorney. I had a clear-cut case with a police officer willing to testify on my behalf, and I had a stable job that gave me the time and energy to fight. Not everyone had those advantages. That was why HOA reform was so important. Organizations like Pleasant Valley Estates, HOA wielded real power over people's lives and homes. When that power was exercised fairly and transparently, HOAs could be positive forces that maintained property values and built community. But when that power fell into the wrong hands, it could make people's lives miserable. Robert Chen understood that. Under his leadership, the board implemented several key changes. All fines had to be approved by a majority of the board, not just the president. Homeowners had to receive written notice and an opportunity for a hearing before any fine was imposed. The board had to document specific harm or violation, not just cite vague bylaw language, and there was a clear appeals process that included mediation before escalating to legal action. These might seem like common-sense reforms, but they represented a fundamental shift in how the HOA operated. Instead of assuming residents were trying to get away with violations, the new approach assumed people were acting in good faith and worked with them to resolve issues. The results spoke for themselves. In the 2 years since Barbara's removal, the HOA had issued only 3 fines, all for clear and documented violations. One for a homeowner who had left a non-working vehicle on blocks in their driveway for 3 months. One for someone who had built a large shed without getting the required approval, and one for a resident who had repeatedly violated noise ordinances by playing loud music late at night. In each case, the board had worked with the homeowner first, only imposing fines when the issues were not resolved. Compare that to the 17 fines Barbara had issued in a similar time frame, 11 of which had been rescinded. The difference was stark. I finished my coffee and said goodbye to Officer Patterson, wishing him well. As I walked back to my truck, I felt grateful for how things had turned out. I had my home, my truck, and a community that actually felt like a community now. That evening, I attended the HOA meeting Robert had mentioned. About 20 residents showed up, and we discussed the spring landscaping budget, plans for repainting the clubhouse, and a proposal to install new playground equipment in the neighborhood park. The meeting was civil, productive, and even somewhat enjoyable. At the end, a newer resident named Thomas Bryant raised his hand. "I just want to say, I moved here 6 months ago, and I have been really impressed with how this HOA operates. I lived in a different subdivision in Meridian before this, and their HOA was a nightmare. Fines for everything, no communication, total dictatorship. This is so much better." Several people nodded in agreement. Robert smiled. "We work hard to be fair and transparent, and honestly, a lot of the credit goes to Lucas Zimmerman here. If he had not stood up to our previous president's overreach, we might still be operating the old way. Sometimes it takes someone willing to fight back to make things change." I felt my face flush with embarrassment as people turned to look at me. "I just wanted to warm up my truck," I said, and everyone laughed. But Robert was right in a way. Change often required someone to stand up and say enough was enough. It required someone to fight back against injustice, even when that injustice seemed small and petty. Because unchecked, small injustices became big ones. Petty tyranny, if allowed to flourish, became real tyranny. Barbara Henderson had learned that lesson the hard way. Her inability to let go of a minor issue, her escalating harassment, her criminal acts, all had stemmed from her belief that she had the right to control others. And when she lost that control, she had lashed out in increasingly destructive ways until finally, the criminal justice system had intervened. I hoped she had learned from the experience, that her probation and community service had given her perspective on her behavior. But I also knew that some people never learned, never accepted responsibility for their actions, always blamed others for their problems. Either way, it was not my problem anymore. Barbara Henderson was gone from Pleasant Valley Estates, and life went on. As I drove home from the HOA meeting that night, I thought about the journey that had started with such a simple act, warming up my truck on a cold morning. It had led to police visits, legal battles, an HOA board election, criminal charges, and ultimately, real change in my community. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet darkness. Through my living room window, I could see the warm glow of my lamps. This was home, truly home, in a way it had not been when Barbara Henderson was making my life difficult. I got out of the truck and walked to my front door, keys in hand. Across the street, lights were on in the house where Barbara used to live. The young couple who lived there now were good neighbors, friendly and respectful. The man worked as a teacher and his wife was a nurse. They had a golden retriever that loved to play in the front yard. That was what a neighborhood should be. People living their lives, being good neighbors, looking out for each other without trying to control each other. It was not complicated, but it required leaders who understood that their role was to serve, not to rule. Inside my house, I made myself dinner, watched some television, and prepared for the next day of work. It was an ordinary evening, peaceful and uneventful. And after everything that had happened, ordinary and uneventful felt pretty good. The next morning, I woke up to find the temperature had dropped again overnight. It was not quite as cold as that first morning when this whole thing started, but cold enough that my truck would need warming up. I made my coffee, gathered my things, and headed outside. I started the engine, listened to the familiar diesel rumble, and watched the exhaust cloud in the cold air. No one came running out to yell at me. No one called the police. No one threatened me with fines. I just warmed up my truck like millions of other people do every winter morning across America. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones that let you live your life in peace, doing ordinary things without harassment or interference. That was what I had fought for, and that was what I had won. The sun rose over Boise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My truck was warm, my coffee was hot, and I had a full day of honest work ahead of me. Life was good in Pleasant Valley Estates, and I had every intention of keeping it that way.